Nothing like this has ever happened in this neighborhood, on this street, ever. And for something like this to happen, especially to a child.
On a quiet street in Jacksonville, Florida, 27-year-old Brianna Johnson stepped outside her home with her two young daughters, 4-year-old Harmony Reed and 2-year-old Rhythm Reed. Within minutes, something unfolded that would draw homicide detectives, crime scene investigators, and emergency responders to the neighborhood. Authorities say what began as a confrontation involving the children's father quickly became the focus of a major criminal investigation. By the time officers arrived, one child was dead, 2 family members had suffered critical injuries, and the person investigators identified as the suspect had disappeared in what police say was a stolen SUV. As detectives worked to reconstruct the sequence of events, questions emerged about the relationship between those involved, what witnesses observed, and whether there had been earlier warning signs. The investigation would uncover a timeline that prosecutors say explains how an ordinary afternoon turned into one of Jacksonville's most closely watched homicide cases. Before we continue, please don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe so you never miss a new case. Before investigators began reconstructing the events that unfolded outside a home in Jacksonville, Florida, the case centered on a young family whose daily life had followed a routine familiar to many parents. At the center of that family was 27-year-old Brianna Johnson, a mother raising her 2 daughters, Harmony Reed and Rhythm Reed. Friends and relatives described Brianna as someone whose time was largely focused on caring for her children and managing the responsibilities of motherhood. According to family members who later spoke publicly, her daughters were the priority in her everyday life.
Try and get out. You got family members who love you and friends who can encourage you to get out from that kind of situation. Try your best to get out.
And much of her schedule revolved around providing for them and ensuring their needs were met. Brianna shared a close relationship with both children. Family photographs and memories shared after the incident show the 3 spending time together during ordinary family moments. Relatives said she was actively involved in raising her daughters and remained committed to giving them stability as they grew. Although few details about her personal career or long-term plans have been released publicly, those who knew her said she was focused on building a future centered on her children and their well-being. Her oldest daughter, Harmony Reed, was 4 years old. Family members described her as an energetic child with a curious personality who enjoyed playing, exploring, and spending time with the people around her. They said she had reached the stage where she was developing her own interests and becoming increasingly independent. Harmony shared a strong bond with her mother and often took on the role of an attentive older sister to 2-year-old Rhythm. According to relatives, the sisters were frequently together, whether playing at home or accompanying their mother during daily activities. Rhythm Reed, the youngest member of the family, was 2 years old at the time of the shooting. As the youngest child, she was still in the early stages of development, learning new skills and relying heavily on the care and guidance of her mother. Family members describe her as a child with many milestones still ahead of her and expressed hope that she would continue to grow in a safe and supportive environment. Following the shooting, Harmony died from her injuries. Brianna Johnson and Rhythm Reed survived the attack, but were hospitalized in critical condition. Medical teams continued treating both as investigators worked to establish the sequence of events that led to the shooting. While Brianna and Rhythm fought to recover, detectives shifted their attention to determining exactly what had occurred outside the Jacksonville home and how a family dispute escalated into a homicide investigation. At the center of the investigation was the relationship between Brianna Johnson and the father of her 2 daughters, Trudale Reed Jr. The 2 shared 4-year-old Harmony Reed and 2-year-old Rhythm Reed. By the time of the shooting, authorities indicated that they were no longer in a relationship, although they remained connected through their children. As detectives examined the background of both individuals, they reviewed previous interactions between Reed and law enforcement. Court records show that Reed had previously been arrested in connection with a domestic violence allegation involving Brianna Johnson. However, that case was later dismissed by prosecutors, and no conviction resulted from those allegations. The dismissal means the earlier case did not establish criminal liability, and it should not be treated as proof of wrongdoing. Because the incident involved individuals with a prior relationship, detectives examined earlier police reports and court filings as part of their investigation. Reviewing previous contacts between the parties is a routine step in cases involving family violence and helps investigators establish a timeline of documented events. While those records provide background, prosecutors have indicated that the current case will primarily rely on evidence connected to the July 2026 shooting, including witness statements, forensic findings, and evidence collected from the scene.
Facing a judge for the first time in court today. Thank you for joining us. I'm Heather Crawford.
And I'm Jessica Clark. We know tonight Trudell Reed Jr. will remain in prison. A judge did not grant him bond. He's facing 7 charges, and you can see them on the screen, including second-degree murder and 2 counts of attempted first-degree murder.
Investigative reporter Riley Phillips joins us now. And Riley, I know you've been digging into Reed's criminal past, and court records show he has a history of violence.
Yes, Reed has 2 prior arrests involving domestic battery, but those charges were ultimately dropped, leading to questions about how this history will impact his case.
Folks that harm or kill children really takes it to a whole different level in terms of culpability.
Trudell Reed Jr. now behind bars after a deadly shooting Tuesday evening. The Jacksonville Sheriff's Office says the 29-year-old fired his gun during an argument outside of a home on Tracy Lynn Drive, ultimately shooting and killing his 4-year-old daughter and injuring his 2-year-old daughter and their 27-year-old mother. JSO says Reed left the scene in a stolen SUV but was found 20 minutes later. This is not the first time Reed has been arrested, though. His first arrest, an armed robbery in 2015. He was sentenced to 45 months in jail. Then a domestic battery arrest in 2022. Court records show it involved a family member, but the charge was later dropped. His latest arrest happened a year ago in July 2025. Another domestic battery incident involving a family member. That charge was also dropped.
Prosecutors look at the spectrum of the nature of the crime, and if it's a lower level domestic violence, they're going to be a little more amenable to resolving the case or maybe dropping it, particularly if the victim wants it dropped.
On the afternoon of July 1st, 2026, a residential neighborhood on Jacksonville's west side became the scene of a homicide investigation after a family dispute turned into a shooting. According to investigators, Brianna Johnson was outside her home with her 2 daughters, 4-year-old Harmony Reed and 2-year-old Rhythm Reed, when the children's father, Trudell Reed Jr., arrived. Detectives say an argument began between Brianna and Reed. As the exchange continued, the situation escalated within a short period of time. The verbal confrontation quickly developed into an act of violence. According to witness statements collected by police, gunfire erupted during the confrontation. Residents in the area reported hearing multiple shots before calling 911, while others looked outside to determine what had happened. When officers and emergency medical personnel arrived, they found 3 victims suffering from gunshot wounds. 4-year-old Harmony Reed had been struck by gunfire and sustained fatal injuries. Brianna Johnson was also wounded during the shooting and required immediate emergency medical treatment. 2-year-old Rhythm Reed suffered gunshot injuries as well and was transported to the hospital alongside her mother. Emergency responders secured the area while medical teams worked to stabilize the surviving victims before transporting them for further treatment. The shooting ended within moments, but the scene immediately shifted into an active crime investigation. Detectives began interviewing witnesses, documenting evidence, and establishing the sequence of events. Crime scene investigators processed the area while officers searched for the suspect, who authorities said had fled before police arrived. Immediately after the shooting, investigators say Trudell Reed Jr. left the scene before officers arrived. According to the Jacksonville Sheriff's Office, he fled in a sport utility vehicle that authorities later identified as a stolen SUV. Officials have not publicly released the exact route he traveled after leaving the neighborhood, but dispatchers quickly distributed information about both the suspect and the vehicle to law enforcement agencies throughout the area. As emergency responders focused on treating the victims, patrol officers secured the crime scene while detectives launched a manhunt. A be on the lookout, BOLO, alert was issued within a short time, providing officers with the suspect's description and details about the stolen vehicle. The alert allowed agencies across Jacksonville and neighboring jurisdictions to begin searching roadways, neighborhoods, and locations where investigators believe the suspect might attempt to travel. Throughout the search, detectives gathered information from witnesses who had seen the suspect before and after the shooting. Investigators also reviewed surveillance footage from nearby homes, businesses, and traffic cameras to establish a timeline of his movements. Officers examined evidence collected at the scene, including physical evidence, witness statements, and forensic findings, while investigators worked to determine the direction in which the suspect had fled. The search lasted only a matter of hours before authorities located Reed. Law enforcement officers took him into custody without publicly reporting a prolonged confrontation. Following his arrest, investigators continued processing both the crime scene and the recovered vehicle. Detectives documented and preserved evidence that could later be presented during court proceedings, including forensic examinations of the SUV and any items recovered during the arrest. With the suspect in custody, investigators shifted their focus from locating the individual to building the criminal case. Detectives continued interviewing witnesses, reviewing digital evidence, analyzing forensic results, and comparing those findings with statements collected during the investigation. Prosecutors would later use that evidence to support the charges filed against Reed, while investigators continued reconstructing the sequence of events from the initial confrontation through the suspect's flight and eventual arrest. As law enforcement officers secured the crime scene, emergency medical personnel focused on treating the 3 victims. Paramedics arrived within minutes of receiving reports of the shooting and immediately began assessing their injuries before transporting them to a nearby hospital. The priority was to stabilize each victim as quickly as possible while trauma teams prepared for their arrival. Brianna Johnson was admitted with life-threatening gunshot injuries. Upon reaching the hospital, she was transferred to the care of emergency physicians, trauma surgeons, nurses, and other medical specialists. Doctors worked to stabilize her condition through emergency treatment while conducting imaging studies and evaluating the extent of her injuries. Hospital officials did not publicly disclose specific medical procedures, citing patient privacy, but confirmed that Brianna remained in critical condition as she continued receiving intensive care. 2-year-old Rhythm Reed was also transported for emergency treatment after suffering gunshot wounds. Pediatric trauma specialists immediately began evaluating her injuries and providing the care required for a young child with critical injuries. Like her mother, Rhythm remained hospitalized as doctors monitored her condition and continued treatment. Medical updates released through family members indicated that she survived the initial attack, although her recovery was expected to require ongoing care. 4-year-old Harmony Reed sustained the most severe injuries during the shooting. Despite the efforts of first responders and hospital medical staff, doctors were unable to save her. Hospital personnel later confirmed that Harmony had died from the injuries she suffered in the attack. Her death changed the investigation from a multiple victim shooting into a homicide case, prompting detectives to coordinate closely with the medical examiner's office. While physicians concentrated on treating Brianna and Rhythm, investigators remained at the hospital to gather information that could assist the criminal investigation when appropriate. At the same time, detectives notified family members and continued collecting evidence from the crime scene. As medical teams worked to preserve the lives of the surviving victims, investigators began reconstructing the events that had unfolded only hours earlier, laying the foundation for the criminal case that would follow. As investigators began interviewing residents, several neighbors described the sequence of events that unfolded within moments of the shooting. According to witness accounts shared with local media, the sound of multiple gunshots disrupted the normally quiet neighborhood, prompting residents to look outside or leave their homes to determine what had happened. Some witnesses reported seeing people running toward the scene, while others immediately called 911 to report the shooting and request emergency medical assistance. Several residents said they remained at a safe distance until first responders arrived, while others attempted to provide assistance to the victims within the limits of what they could safely do. Their statements later helped detectives establish an initial timeline of the incident. Parents and caregivers living nearby also described moving children indoors as soon as they realized gunfire had erupted outside. Neighbors closed doors, kept family members away from windows, and waited for law enforcement officers to secure the area before returning outside. After emergency responders transported the victims to the hospital, the neighborhood remained an active crime scene for several hours. Residents watched as detectives photographed evidence, interviewed witnesses, and processed the area. Many described the incident as unlike anything they had previously experienced in their community. Their observations became an important part of the investigation, providing detectives with additional details that were compared with physical evidence, surveillance footage, and forensic findings as authorities worked to reconstruct the events leading to the shooting. As investigators began interviewing residents, several neighbors described the sequence of events that unfolded within moments of the shooting. According to witness accounts shared with local media, the sound of multiple gunshots disrupted the normally quiet neighborhood, prompting residents to look outside or leave their homes to determine what had happened. Some witnesses reported seeing people running toward the scene, while others immediately called 911 to report the shooting and request emergency medical assistance. Several residents said they remained at a safe distance until first responders arrived, while others attempted to provide assistance to the victims within the limits of what they could safely do. Their statements later helped detectives establish an initial timeline of the incident. Parents and caregivers living nearby also described moving children indoors as soon as they realized gunfire had erupted outside. Neighbors closed doors, kept family members away from windows, and waited for law enforcement officers to secure the area before returning outside. Once the area was secured, detectives and crime scene investigators began documenting every aspect of the scene. Evidence technicians photographed the location, marked and collected shell casings, and preserved physical evidence for forensic examination. Investigators interviewed witnesses to establish a timeline and compare their accounts with available surveillance footage from nearby homes and businesses where applicable. Authorities also processed the stolen SUV recovered after the suspect's arrest, searching it for forensic evidence. Ballistics experts examined recovered firearm evidence and shell casings to determine weapon matches, while medical evidence from the victim's injuries was incorporated into the investigation to support the reconstruction of a shooting. Following an hours-long search, law enforcement officers located and arrested Trudale Reed Jr. in Jacksonville without publicly reporting a prolonged confrontation. After being taken into custody, he was transported to the Duval County Jail, where investigators completed the booking process, documented the arrest, and formally processed the evidence connected to the case. Prosecutors charged Reed with first-degree murder in connection with the death of 4-year-old Harmony Reed, along with 2 counts of attempted murder for the shootings of Brianna Johnson and 2-year-old Rhythm Reed. He also faced additional charges related to firearm offenses and the alleged theft of the SUV used to flee the scene. In the days following the shooting, Brianna Johnson's family focused on supporting the surviving victims while making arrangements for 4-year-old Harmony Reed's funeral. Relatives launched a GoFundMe campaign to help cover medical expenses, funeral costs, and ongoing care for Brianna and 2-year-old Rhythm Reed, as both remain hospitalized. Community members responded through donations, prayers, and organized support efforts. Churches and neighborhood groups also held vigils to remember Harmony and stand with the family during the investigation. As the criminal case moved forward, relatives continued providing updates on Brianna's and Rhythm's recovery while preparing for the legal proceedings ahead. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more true crime stories. See you in the next case.